Hello, and welcome to the Behavior Education Connection, the podcast that works to connect the world of behavior analysis and the world of education. We focus on topics important to behavior analysts who work in the public schools and those who support them. Join us and spend time gaining insights and ideas as our host talks with fellow behavior analysts as well as other experts in the field. Hello, everyone, and welcome again to our newest episode of the Behavior Education Connection. I am your host, Dr. Selena Layden, and I am super excited to be with one of my friends and colleagues, Dr. Susan Copeland. Hi, Susan. How are you?
I'm doing well, Selena. How are you?
I am great. Susan, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. I am an emerita professor of special education at the University of New Mexico. I started out many years ago as a music therapist, and then I did various other things, including being a special education classroom teacher and a case manager running a Medicaid waiver program for adults with developmental disabilities in the community. And that finally led me back to graduate school and behavior analysis and also teacher education.
Nice. And so just to put out there, you are a BCBA, but you've worked in public schools quite a bit through your career.
Yes, I am a BCBA and was a faculty member within the ABA preparation program at UNM, as well as the special education faculty, and have conducted research in both areas.
Yeah, and actually that's how we got connected, is because we both have this common interest in these public school BCBAs and what they do and what they don't do and all sorts of things. And so you had an article published recently, and I want to read the title. It's in Behavior Analysis and Practice, and it's called Preparation of Behavior Analysts for School-Based Practice. And this was just released just a couple of months ago in November, so it's still pretty fresh off the press, so to speak. And so I kind of want to hear a little bit about what got you interested in school-based BCBAs and why did you kind of look at this preparation component?
Right. Well, as even though I had been teaching in this behavior analysis preparation program, I realized as I began to talk to our graduates and also our students who were out receiving supervision, that there was still so much we didn't know about how BCBAs are prepared to work in school settings. And as our profession has rightly increased the rigor of training programs across the years, it just seemed like there were sometimes gaps in what our students, our graduates, were doing in school settings and possibly how we were preparing them. So I really got interested initially in how could we improve our training program here at the University of New Mexico. And that led me to your work in this area. And as I began to talk to people around the country, I realized that even though this area of school-based practice is, I think, the second largest area of practice for BCBAs, there is still really relatively a small amount of information about how do we actually prepare practitioners to do this work. And do we need to make any changes or do we not? And that kind of led me to this survey that we decided to conduct to just initially see what the people who are out there actually doing this, what did they report about how they were trained, what they're doing, and how confident they feel or don't feel in their roles, what's been helpful to them, what have been barriers that they've seen, that kind of thing.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So it is the second largest practice area, at least as of the last data I saw. But we know a lot about behavior analytic practice in schools, interventions, how that happens, but we really don't know a lot about the folks that are doing this. So I guess the question is, what did we find out? Are we preparing our BCBAs to practice in schools?
Right. Well, I think in some ways it's exactly what you said. The rigor of our preparation programs and behavior analysis is continuing to increase, and it shows, I think, in the interventions that our graduates are using in school districts. But at the same time, what we found was that our participants in this particular study, and we surveyed people all across the country, and what they appeared to feel was that while they felt very prepared in some ways, there were gaps of knowledge that they did not have any idea about before they started working in school settings. A common theme was that schools are very complex. They're very complex systems. They're complex for professionals, they're complex for parents, and there are lots of like legal issues that go into schooling and all kinds of other things. And the participants in our study felt that while they knew behavior analysis really well, they didn't always have a lot of context knowledge that could have been useful to them in being more effective. And so they had many recommendations for how we might improve preparation programs, and also things that might be things that practicing school-based practitioners could also take advantage of and improve their scope of competence.
Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense because when you go to school to be a behavior analyst, you aren't necessarily going into schools, right? That may not be your goal. Our field is, of course, super vast and wide, and we have lots and lots of applications of what we do. And so we can't train everybody to do everything. One of the things I was looking at in your study is the number of people that completed their supervision in public schools. And your study compared to the one that I did, we had slightly different answers, but what we found is still not everybody is doing any supervision in the public schools. Some people are, but we still have a group of people that aren't, but now they're working in the public schools. And so, I don't know what your thoughts are about that.
Yeah, what we found was that the group, I think every study you sort of attract participants that are interested in the topic. So I
Sure.
do need to say that our study is relatively small compared to all the BCBAs that are out there in the United States. But what we found was that while quite a few of our participants had completed supervised field work in school settings, quite a few had not. But the group that had at least some school-based experience did feel better prepared. And one interesting finding to me was that those who had both supervised experience in schools and those who had clinical, who had both, in other words, had the luxury of having both kinds of field experiences, they were the most confident. They actually felt better prepared all the way around. And you are so right. In no profession that I know do you come out the first day knowing how you should be, how you should practice in every single setting. So there is always on the job learning, of course. But I think if our study accurately reflects what practitioners say, there are ways that people could possibly learn more during their initial preparation. And then maybe there are ways that as a field we could better support practitioners who didn't have the luxury of, having that supervised field experience, or maybe being a special ed teacher or a general ed teacher or something else before they got their behavior analytic training.
Yeah, and I wanted to follow up on that really quick. One of the things that I think about a lot as I teach and as I work with aspiring BCBA, so to speak, it's really difficult to obtain your BCBA, and you're right, rightfully so. There should be rigor. There should be, it shouldn't just be you breathe, so you're a BCBA. But with the difficulty that comes with that, we also find to work in schools, you often need additional education. You either need a special education teaching license, a general ed teaching license, an administrative license, some other component. And we're seeing some of that change, but it's slow for sure. So do you think that that could in any way dissuade BCBAs from going into school applications? Because I've already worked really hard to get my BCBA. I don't want to get another degree. So I don't know. Do you think that that could be a barrier?
Well, I think in terms of regulatory reasons, yes. If you're working in a state where you have to have some other credential, then that is definitely a barrier. And I think one that as a field we need, in general, the findings from your work and certainly the findings from our study indicate that the role of BCBAs in schools is still all over the place.
Yes.
It's not like some of our sister sort of professions, like our related services, like SLPs and PTs, where things are more codified
Hmm.
and there is a specific role. So, yes, I think in some ways that could pose a barrier. But on the other hand, another interesting thing about this study was that the respondents, they absolutely said direct experience, you've got to have it. If for nothing else, then what I call street cred, to
Hmm.
get a very busy classroom teacher to buy in to what you're saying, to think that to trust you enough to learn from you and accept your support, you do need to have some experience. But our respondents didn't necessarily say it had to be before you became a BCBA. They felt like on the job. I mean, again, like we were saying, you can't come out prepared for everything.
Right.
And so if school districts were more systematic in providing targeted professional development, financial support for that professional development, clarifying roles, providing mentors, I think that that could remove some of those barriers. In our state at least, and in the other states where I've worked, novice school teachers, so let's say special education teachers, their first year, they're assigned a mentor.
Hmm.
There is a mentorship program. But I think in behavior analysis in the schools, at least in the schools I'm aware of in our state, certainly there is no mentorship. And I think that alone, if we think about systems, system-wide changes, providing, clarifying roles, codifying what BCBA's, the scope of the role, and then providing the same structures that we do for other professions could really reduce some of those barriers.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm sure this is not unique. We have school districts where there are 20, 30 BCBAs that are employed, but we have many where there's one. And there's one person who is the BCBA. There might be two. The other thing that we find in Virginia is a lot of our school-based BCBAs have only been certified in the last 5 years. And so they're not veteran BCBAs either. And
Right.
so they're still developing their BCBA skills, which is normal and natural. But then they're also developing all of these school skills that they may or may not have gotten all as well. And so I think it's just a lot to juggle when you are first starting for sure. So finding those mentors and finding the peer network, I think is just so critical,
Yes, I think the peer network, our students graduates of our program have sort of formed their own
which is
informal
great.
network, but I think formalized networks like Sabian or like what you have done in Virginia, that's a key, I think, to growing the profession within the schools and to getting enough clout, frankly, to be able to work with schools and with departments of education across the country to make sure that these systems are recognizing what the science of behavior can do, what these professionals can do, and then what is the scope of their role. Just like I think you found to some extent in your study, participants in our study commented on the lack of definition of roles and then the role overlap because their administrators didn't really understand how to use their skills or are always being the crisis person. And that's important, but there's so many other ways that BCBAs could contribute to positive outcomes for everybody in the school, not the kids, of course, but also the faculty, the teachers.
Yeah, absolutely. Which, given we're still in that post-COVID time where we don't have enough teachers and the teachers we have are honestly still very burnt out in a lot of ways, I think that support is really, really critical and a huge area that behavior analysis could really help support. I want to go back to the other thing that you were saying about the preparation programs. So you had some recommendations for preparation programs and what they might consider. What do you think prep programs need to think about, knowing they can't be everything to everybody? But if we really are producing this many BCBAs that are going into work in educational settings, what do preparation programs need to think about?
Right. And I've thought about this a lot. And so what I'm going to say is maybe a starting point for us is based both on the what our respondents in this study said, but also what other people like you and others have said as well. And I think preparation programs are in the midst of making additional changes, which is, again, sometimes difficult, but always a good thing if we want to improve our practice and the quality of our profession. So now might be a great time to think about some of these. And I would say that one of the number one things that came out of this study, at least, was more of an emphasis on collaboration and collaboration beyond just everybody coming to the IEP meeting, for example, and just saying, okay, this is what I'm going to work on, and then going around the table and then you're done. But actually looking at other models of collaboration. There's been some interesting work on interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary and interprofessionalism. And in behavior analysis, people are beginning to talk about that. And that is something that came up. We didn't even ask about collaboration. And yet it was a big theme in terms of what the analysis of the open-ended comments. So I think that's one thing preparation programs could do. Another is to just acknowledge that it is the second, the second greatest primary practice, and start at least integrating some of that information into coursework. If you think about it, even if you plan to only work in behavior analytic clinics or in other kinds of settings, you're probably going to be working with school-age populations, and their natural environment is public schools or is school in some form or fashion. So it makes sense to me as a behavior analyst that we would want to know what those contexts are when we're developing our treatment plans. Integrating at least some of the knowledge about schools, about the legal requirements for schooling, into existing coursework, I think it could be done. If you're working in a preparation program that, like we had at UNM, that allows some additional work besides just the core classes, then I think making sure that there are offerings that people could take. Somebody might decide that they are really interested in school-based, they want to learn some more, so they might take a class in special ed law, or they might go take a class on within the special education program or in the SLP department. I don't know. So I think offering those kinds of opportunities. And then I've been really intrigued, and people are doing this, beginning to do it, I think, more about providing interdisciplinary supervised field work, if you want to call it that, but those opportunities to work with other preparation programs in other disciplines and systematically and carefully plan opportunities for the behavior analyst in training to really work in a school setting with an SLP or with a special educator or whoever it might be. And it doesn't mean that, it could be as complicated or as uncomplicated as as you want to make it. But I think that that is another way that certainly our participants felt that having at least some supervised field work and having that field work doing a variety of tasks, which I think gets back to some of your work, Selena, on what is it that BCBAs are really doing in schools? Like, what are the roles that you should be prepared for? And coming in perhaps and working directly with students, that is certainly part of it, but I think increasingly it is also working with the people who are actually carrying out those programs. So having the opportunity to do a variety of roles within that supervised field work, I think would really help. I'm so excited about OBM being beefed up within the new regulations for preparation. And I think that offers some really interesting ways to build in some of understanding how systems like school systems work and how we might be able to take some of those principles and apply those in school settings.
Yeah, I think one thing that has struck me over the last few years, I have really thought about how, because we're an applied field, we have our science, we have our core competencies, we have all those things, but we are applying what we know and do to other fields. And so if we truly don't understand those fields, if we truly don't, quote, walk a mile in their shoes, so to speak, that's when we do run into these issues. You mentioned buy-in, which comes up over and over again. That's when we run into these issues of we don't understand the system in which we're trying to be part of. And so there are misunderstandings and there are challenges that we have to work through. And so I love the idea of collaborating with other professionals, even in that supervision time. And yes, we have to get our behavior analytics skills and knowledge. That's a non-starter. I mean, that has to happen. But if you're going to apply your skills in geriatrics, then you need to have that experience and have those connections and networks so that you can be part of that field, not standing on the outside of the field. And I think that's been one of the really big challenges from education is we've come in with this is our field, forgetting that, well, what we're really doing is applying our field in yours or in the field of education. And so how can we do that in a way that's integrative rather than being not as kind and lovely as we want to be.
Right. Well, I think some of the work, that Broadhead and others have done, talking about humble,
Yes.
coming with a humble attitude is always a good idea for sure. But I think you're so right because it is an interesting field in that we could not, even if we wanted to, we could not just take on every single student and
Right.
everything they need. That's not how it works. We want what we're teaching our students, we want it to be a part of their whole life. And that means that we teach mom and dad, and we teach the teacher, and we teach the aide or the para. I mean, yeah, and I do think we're doing better as a field slowly at paying attention to how we can work with respect with other professionals, and also how to use our science to help them, teach them skills that they can then go out and use. I think we are better at it, but I think we have a ways perhaps to go in that area. Yeah, one program I was looking at did things, as simple as have the related service professionals, including BCBAs, together and like reading what the scope of practice is for each of those and then discussing that. Yeah, it's fascinating. We don't want to be silos. We
Right.
know the research doesn't support that as an effective way to develop and implement treatment plans. But it is a little bit different way. And that's why I'm so interested lately in models of teaming,
Hmm.
because I think that some of the more recent moves towards different teaming models will hopefully help us in that way.
Well, there's a particular quote in here that I thought was really good, and I'm going to read it, and then I would like to hear you expand on it. But in the discussion of your article, you say, behavior analysts at all credential levels have valuable expertise to support students directly and indirectly in ways that create access to education in the least restrictive environment and facilitate their progress in their individual education programs. They may not be as effective in doing so, however, without a clear understanding of the overarching purpose of schools, the legal requirements for education of students with and without disabilities, and the knowledge and skills students are expected to learn within educational programs. I think this is a very important thing, so I would love to hear you expand upon it a little bit.
Sure. I think again, it kind of goes back to understanding the context in which we're practicing, right? And I got my training, my early training in behavior analysis and my early training in special education back in the day, as they say. And it was at that time all about how you look at the environment, you think about what the demands of the environment are, and you determine what your student or client skills are, and then you work towards helping them be successful in whatever environment that is. And we learned so much about how to teach all kinds of skills and look at challenging behavior and all of those things. But if we don't practice that, if we don't know why do kids go to school? I mean, I really wonder sometimes if people have thought about that or studied that. And we can come up with a beautiful plan, but if it doesn't fit the demands of the environment, if it doesn't meet the skill level of the people that are going to be implementing it, if it doesn't help our student make progress in what the goals of schooling are, then we've taught a lot of perhaps interesting, discrete skills, but how is that going to actually help our student in the long run? I had the early experience in graduate school of we worked out in the schools a lot and had the experience of creating a plan with my fellow students and my advisor for a student who had autism and didn't have verbal language, and a way to get that student was like a social communication intervention, and it was great, and the student loved it. And so we did that in the spring, and then we went back in the fall to see how the student was doing. And we found both the plan and the the student was using like PECS communication booklet locked up in the teacher's desk.
Mhm.
And that was an eye opener to me that, wow, it's not all about what I know. It's about what
Right.
I know about the big picture. And I can use my behavior analytics skills to think about not just what does the student need and how to teach it, but the whole environment so that it will continue when I am not there. And to
Yeah.
me, that's part of it.
That's a really important part because most of the time when you're a BCBA in a school, you're not the direct service provider. And if you are, you're not the direct service provider for a long period of time, right? That's the teacher. And so, when I teach my students, I say all the time, the best intervention is not the one that looks the prettiest on the page. It's the one that's going to actually be implemented
Yeah.
appropriately in the environment. And if that means we have to think about, well, science would tell us this might be the most effective intervention, but they're not going to actually implement that. So let me find one that's going to work, that's socially acceptable, all the things. And you're right. I think we're getting better at thinking of through those things, and I think we're getting better at that collaboration. But I agree. I think we still have a ways to go, and I think we need to really focus on that for us, those of us in practice, as well as those of us that are creating preparation and preparing the next generation of behavior analysts. So, Susan, this has been amazing, and I really appreciate your conversation with me today. Is there anything else that you want to share or add before we send off today?
Well, I think there's still so much left to learn. And I think as these new changes come into our preparation programs, we'll be able to even do more. But I'm really interested in wanting to hear more about what school, we looked at certain areas of schooling that we had identified as important, but I think there's a big gap out there. And what do the people who are actually out there in the schools, what are other topics that they think are important that we should be paying attention to as we design our coursework or whatever for preparation? And then our study focused primarily on BCBAs. We also had a few BCABAs and we had some BCBADs, but I think learning more about how RBTs are being used, and also BCABAs if you're in an area where BCBAs are there. I think those are another two other important professions that are linked to what BCBAs do, and it would be really interesting and helpful, I think, to the field to learn more about that. So I think there's just a lot left to learn, even though it's so exciting to see more and more and more CEs around school-based topics, and to see more people trying it out.
Absolutely. And now we have more research questions, right, Susan?
Right. We could be doing this forever.
The work is never done. No, it's great.
That's
Susan, thank you so much for your time today and for sharing your expertise. The article is great. Again, it's in Behavior Analysis and Practice, and it is called Preparation of Behavior Analysts for School-Based Practice. I really appreciate the contribution to the field, but I also, just like I said, appreciate your time today.
Well, thank you for asking me. It's always fun to talk about these topics.
Very much, very much. And so thank you, Susan, and thank you to our listeners, and we will see you on the next episode.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Behavior Education Connection. Join us next time for another great conversation about behavior analysis in the schools. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on an episode. Sending out a special thanks to the Virginia Department of Education for supporting our work. We look forward to connecting with you all again soon.